Today, birth control, or the prevention of unwanted pregnancies, is a common and widely accepted practice. Millions of people around the world use various methods of birth control. But did you know that the history of birth control is full of dark and disturbing episodes? In this video, we will explore some of the shocking and unethical ways that birth control was used, tested, and imposed on different groups of people throughout history. One of the most horrific forms of birth control was forced sterilization, or the surgical removal or destruction of a person's reproductive organs without their consent. Forced sterilization was often used as a tool of social control, eugenics, or genocide to prevent certain groups of people from reproducing and passing on their genes. One of the groups that suffered from this practice were the indigenous women in Canada, who were seen as a threat to the dominant white culture. From the 1930s to the 1970s, thousands of indigenous women were sterilized by doctors and nurses, sometimes during childbirth or other medical procedures, without being informed or asked for their permission. Some of these women were as young as 14 years old, and many of them suffered from physical and psychological trauma as a result. Another group that faced this injustice were the black women in the United States, who were targeted by a program called the Mississippi Appendectomy. This program, which ran from the 1930s to the 1970s, involved performing unnecessary hysterectomies, removal of the uterus, on poor and uneducated women, often without their consent or awareness. The program was supported by the federal government and aimed to reduce the welfare costs and the birth rate of the black population, who were considered inferior and undesirable. The Jewish women in Nazi Germany also endured this horror, as they were subjected to brutal experiments and sterilization by the infamous Dr. Josef Mengele and his associates at the Auschwitz concentration camp. Mengele, who was known as the Angel of Death, injected chemicals, radiation, and bacteria into the women's ovaries, uterus, and fallopian tubes, causing severe pain, infections, and death. He also performed surgeries without anesthesia, cutting and sewing the women's reproductive organs. He did this in the name of racial hygiene and scientific research. Another dark aspect of the history of birth control is the dangerous and unethical testing of new methods and drugs on human subjects, often without their consent or proper information. One of the most controversial examples of unethical medical experiments on women is the development of the contraceptive pill, which was tested on poor and illiterate women in Puerto Rico in the 1950s. The women were not informed of the potential side effects or risks of taking the pill, which was given to them as part of a fertility study. Many of them suffered from nausea, headaches, blood clots, strokes, and even death. But the researchers ignored their complaints and continued the trials, claiming that the pill was safe and effective. Another case of unethical medical experiments on women is the testing of quinacrine, a chemical that was used to treat malaria as a form of non-surgical sterilization. The chemical was inserted into the women's fallopian tubes, where it caused inflammation and scarring, blocking the passage of eggs and sperm. The procedure was performed on women in India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and other countries in the 1980s and 1990s, without their consent or proper follow-up. Quinacrine was banned by the World Health Organization in 1994 due to its unknown long-term effects and potential carcinogenicity. A third dark aspect of the history of birth control is the coercive and incentivized programs that were implemented by governments and organizations to reduce the population growth and fertility rates of certain regions or countries, often violating the human rights and autonomy of the people. One of the most controversial population policies in history was the one-child policy in China, which lasted from 1979 to 2015. This policy restricted most couples to having only one child, with some exceptions for ethnic minorities, rural residents, and parents of disabled children. The main goal of the policy was to control the population size and improve the economic and social development of the country. However, the policy also had many negative consequences, such as forced abortions, sterilizations, fines, discrimination, gender imbalance, and psychological trauma. Another country that implemented a population policy was India, which launched its family planning program in 1952. The program aimed to reduce the population growth and improve the health and welfare of the people. The program offered various methods of birth control, such as condoms, pills, IUDs, and sterilization, as well as incentives such as cash, food, land, and education to encourage people to adopt them. However, the program also faced many challenges such as lack of awareness, access, quality, and choice, as well as coercion, corruption, and abuse. In 1976, during the emergency period, the government imposed a mass sterilization campaign, which targeted millions of men and women, often without their consent or proper care. Now, we stand at a crossroads where science, ethics, and personal choice converge to empower individuals.